The giant trees of Lhasa stretched toward three moons, their trunks wide as fortresses, their canopies lost in perpetual twilight that painted everything in shades of purple and deep blue. Beneath them, a procession moved in silence through the undergrowth, crushing luminescent moss that released spores into the air like dying stars. 8 warriors of the Silver Claw clan, their blue skin marked with ritual scars that told stories of hunts and battles, surrounded a small figure bound in rough vines that cut into tender flesh. The child stumbled over exposed roots, and no hand reached to steady her. No voice spoke comfort. The warriors moved as if she were already dead, already just meat for the forest to reclaim. Leonin was 5 years old. Her blue skin was paler than the warriors, almost translucent in places where veins showed through like rivers on a map. Her white hair, once carefully braided by her mother's hands, now hung in tangled ropes mixed with leaves, dirt, and the dried blood from where they had torn her from her hiding place 3 days ago. She did not cry. The warriors had told her that tears were weakness, and the weak fed the forest. Her father had been strong, the strongest of the Silver Claw, a warrior whose name was spoken with reverence even by enemy clans. Until Karak's blade found his heart 3 days ago during the challenge that should have been honorable, but ended in treachery. Now clan law demanded balance. The chief's bloodline must be returned to nature, every drop of it, so that the forest would accept the new leadership without curse. The procession stopped at a clearing where a massive tree stood alone, its bark blackened by ancient fires that had somehow failed to kill it. They called it the Tree of Sorrow, and the ground around it was stained dark with old blood. How many had died here? Leonin wondered as they pressed her small body against the rough bark that scraped her skin. Dozens? Hundreds? The tree had stood for centuries, they said, and it had never lacked for offerings. The warriors worked quickly, winding thick vines around her small body, pulling them tight enough that she gasped. Her arms were pinned to her sides, her legs bound together. She could barely breathe, and the rough fibers dug into her skin until small beads of blue blood appeared. The eldest warrior, his face a map of old battles where scars crossed scars and a tapestry of violence survived, knelt before her. His eyes were not cruel, but they held no mercy either. Only duty, cold and absolute as winter stone. He touched her forehead with one finger, a gesture that, in other circumstances, would have been a blessing. "Your father broke the oldest law," he said, his voice like gravel grinding. He showed mercy to the human prisoner, the female they captured from the crashed sky vessel. Humans are animals without souls, creatures that walk on 2 legs but have no more honor than the beasts that crawl. He forgot this truth. He let sentiment cloud his judgment. The price is blood, and blood must be paid in full measure. "I am his daughter," Leonin whispered, her voice barely audible over the wind that moved through the canopy above. "Not him. I did nothing wrong. I am just a child." "You are his blood," the warrior replied. And now there was something almost like sadness in his ancient eyes. "Blood pays for blood. The forest demands balance. Your father's mercy was a poison in our clan's veins. We must cut it out, burn it away, let the forest consume it. Perhaps in your next life, you will be born into a clan that remembers the old ways. Perhaps you will be stronger than your father was." The warrior stood, and the procession melted back into the forest shadows like smoke dissipating on the wind. Darkness came quickly under the canopy. The 3 moons rose, their light barely penetrating the layers of leaves above, painting the world in shades of silver and shadow. Leonin pulled against the vines until her wrists bled, the blue blood running warm down her arms, but they held fast. She heard movement in the undergrowth, the crack of branches, the soft pad of feet on moss, the low growl that made her bladder weaken, and warmth spread down her legs in shame and terror. From the shadows emerged shapes that reflected the moonlight in silver ripples, like water-made flesh. 6-legged predators, each the size of a full-grown warrior and heavily muscled, their blue-gray fur shimmering with an oily sheen that seemed to absorb light and reflect it back distorted. Silver fangs, the apex predators of the deep forest. They hunted in packs, and they never left survivors. The lucky died quickly, throats torn out in a single leap. The unlucky lived long enough to feel themselves being eaten. The pack circled the tree slowly, methodically, their heads low to the ground as they tasted the air with tongues that flickered like serpents. 7 of them, Leonine counted through her terror. 7 silver fangs, each one capable of killing a grown warrior in single combat. The alpha, larger than the others and bearing scars that spoke of countless battles won, approached Leonine with deliberate slowness. She could smell its breath, rotten meat, and something acidic that burned her nostrils. It opened its jaws, revealing teeth like daggers, yellowed and still bearing scraps of its last meal. The creature's eyes were intelligent, far more intelligent than any mere beast should be. It understood what she was. It understood that she was helpless. It was savoring the moment. The alpha tensed its 6 legs, muscles bunching, preparing for the killing leap that would end Leonine's short life in a spray of blood and screaming. A shadow fell from above without warning, without sound. It dropped 15 meters from the lowest branches without so much as a whisper of displaced air, landing square on the alpha's back with an impact that drove the massive predator to the ground. The crack of breaking bone echoed through the clearing, sharp and final. Leonine saw a flash of metal in the moonlight, saw something dark spray across the moss, heard a wet, tearing sound that would haunt her dreams for years to come. The alpha's thrashing stopped almost immediately, and the figure on its back rose, silhouetted against the 3 moons, and she saw something that made no sense in her understanding of the world. A human, but humans were small, weak creatures kept as slaves or curiosities by the more enlightened clans. Humans were animals that walked upright and could mimic speech, but had no true understanding, no honor, no dignity. This creature looked nothing like the broken, defeated humans she had seen in cages. This creature looked like death itself had taken physical form. Oscar was 40 years old, though the forest had aged him beyond counting. His hair hung in matted ropes past his shoulders, gray mixed with black and tangled with small bones, feathers and other tokens, whose meaning was lost to Leonine. His body was lean muscle wrapped in scars, some old and white, others still pink and angry, some fresh enough that they still wept clear fluid. He wore animal hides stitched with gut and sinew, crude but effective, and his feet were bare, the soles thick as leather and stained dark with earth and blood. In his right hand, he gripped a jagged knife made from a piece of shuttle hull, its edge honed on stone until it could split hair, its surface still wet with the alpha's blood. The remaining Silverfangs recovered from their shock faster than Leonine expected and attacked as one, a coordinated assault that spoke of pack intelligence and hunting experience. Oscar moved unlike any creature Leonine had seen in her short life. Not gracefully, not with the trained precision of clan warriors who practice forms until movement became meditation, but with the desperate efficiency of something that had learned to kill or die every single day for more than a decade. He caught the first predator's paw in mid-strike, using its own momentum to spin it into the path of another, and the 2 beasts collided with a crash that shook the ground. His knife found throat, belly, eye, moving faster than Leonine could follow, each strike precise and economical. When the 3rd silver fang clamped its jaws on his shoulder, Oscar did not scream. The pain that should have sent anyone into shock seemed to only fuel him. He jammed his free hand into its mouth, past the teeth that were shredding his flesh, grabbed its tongue, and pulled with such force that the creature released him in panic, gagging and stumbling backward. 4 silver fangs lay dead or dying, their blood mixing with the ancient stains on the ground around the Tree of Sorrow. The remaining 3 backed away, their instincts finally overriding their hunger, their pack coordination broken by the sheer ferocity of this strange creature that fought like nothing they had encountered before. Oscar took a single step toward them, his body language changing, becoming larger somehow, more threatening, and unleashed a sound that froze Leonine's blood in her veins. Not a human shout, not a word, but a primal roar that spoke of territory and dominance in a language older than speech, older than thought, a language written in instinct and survival. The silver fangs broke and ran, disappearing into the forest shadows, their pride forgotten in the face of something they could not understand or defeat. Oscar stood still for a long moment, breathing hard, his chest rising and falling like a bellows. Blood ran down his shoulder and arm from where the silver fang's teeth had found meat, dripping onto the moss in dark splatters. Then he turned to Leonin, and she pressed herself against the tree, terrified beyond reason. The warriors she understood, the silver fangs she understood. But this creature was something outside her experience, something that violated everything she had been taught about the natural order. He approached slowly, and she saw his eyes properly for the first time. They were blue, lighter than any eyes she had seen, almost gray in the moonlight, and they held something she could not name. Not cruelty, not hunger, something else. Something that looked almost human in the way her father had been human, before Carrick had reminded everyone that mercy was weakness. Oscar examined the vines binding her, testing them with his free hand. Then he cut her bonds with one slash of his knife, the blade passing through the thick fibers as if they were spider silk. Before she could run, before she could even think to run, he threw her over his shoulder like a sack of grain, one arm securing her legs, and began to climb. He climbed the giant tree as though gravity was merely a suggestion to be ignored. His bare feet found purchase on bark that looked smooth to Leonin's eyes. His free hand grasped branch after branch with absolute certainty, and within minutes they were 60 meters above the forest floor. The world below became a carpet of shadows and moonlight. He leaped to a neighboring tree, a gap that seemed impossibly wide, and Leonin felt her stomach drop as they sailed through empty air. Then another tree, and another, until Leonin was dizzy from the movement and the height and the sheer impossibility of what was happening. Finally, they reached a cliff face that rose like a wall from the forest, stone that looked unclimbable, sheer and smooth. Oscar scaled it without rope or equipment, his fingers finding cracks invisible in the darkness, his body moving with the confidence of someone who had made this climb hundreds of times, and pulled them both into a cave mouth hidden behind a curtain of hanging vines. Inside, the cave was larger than Leonin expected, a natural chamber carved by ancient water flows. A fire pit sat in the center, surrounded by stones arranged with care, the ashes still warm. Piles of animal furs made crude beds against the walls, layered and thick enough to hold warmth. Weapons hung from wooden pegs driven into cracks in the stone, spears with fire-hardened points that gleamed in the dim light, bows made from springy wood that must have taken weeks to shape properly, arrows fletched with feathers and tipped with stone or bone, knives of various sizes made from stone and salvaged metal, a crude axe with a head of sharpened rock that showed signs of recent use. There was no technology, nothing that spoke of the civilization Leonin knew. No light crystals, no water purifiers, no food storage systems. This was the den of a savage, but a savage who survived through skill and planning rather than luck. Oscar dropped Leonin by the fire pit without ceremony. He grabbed a piece of dried meat from a leather pouch hanging on the wall and tossed it to her. It landed at her feet, dark and tough-looking, covered in some kind of spice or preservative. She did not touch it. The thought of eating made her stomach twist. Oscar shrugged at her refusal and settled onto a pile of furs, beginning to clean his knife with a scrap of hide, the methodical movements of someone performing a ritual that brought comfort. He did not look at her again, as if she were no more interesting than any other object in the cave. Leonin crawled to the farthest corner of the cave and curled into a ball, making herself as small as possible. She was cold despite the lingering warmth from the fire, hungry despite her nausea, and more frightened than when the silver fangs had circled her. At least she understood predators. They killed to eat, to survive, following instincts as old as life itself. This creature, this human, was unpredictable. She had been taught that humans were animals without souls, creatures that mimicked intelligence, but possessed no honor or dignity, no capacity for true thought or feeling. Yet this one had saved her life when he could have just walked away. Why would an animal without a soul risk injury to save someone who meant nothing to it? Night deepened. The three moons crossed the cave mouth in their eternal dance, their light painting moving shadows on the cave walls. Leonin felt heat building in her body, her skin burning while her limbs shook with cold that seemed to come from her bones. Fever, the kind that killed warriors stronger than her, the kind that took children in the night and left them cold and still by morning. She had seen her cousin die of fever 2 winters ago, had watched him burn and shake and finally grow still. She tried to stay quiet, to not draw attention, but a whimper escaped her lips despite her best efforts. Oscar's head turned, the movement sharp and predator quick. He stared at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable in the dim light. Then he made a disgusted sound deep in his throat and stood. He walked to the back of the cave where water dripped constantly down the wall into a natural basin, and returned with a handful of wet moss that glowed faintly in the darkness with bioluminescent spores. He approached Leonine slowly, carefully, as if she might bite, might lash out, and pressed the moss against her forehead with surprising gentleness. The cold was immediate and wonderful, like diving into a pool on the hottest day of summer. Leonine's eyes fluttered closed as relief washed through her burning body. She felt the rough hands adjusting the moss, felt another handful being placed on her neck where the fever burned hottest, felt a fur being draped over her trembling body with a care that seemed at odds with the savage appearance. When she opened her eyes, Oscar was kneeling beside her, and in the firelight that flickered and danced, she saw something impossible. A tear rolled down his dirty face, cutting a clean line through the grime and dried blood, catching the firelight like a falling star. Leonine stared at him, her fever-addled mind struggling to process what she was seeing. Humans did not cry. Animals did not cry. Her voice was barely a whisper, but in the quiet of the cave, it seemed loud as a shout. They said that humans are animals without souls. Then why are you crying for me? Oscar froze. His hand, still holding the moss, began to shake as if he had been struck. His mouth opened, closed, opened again like a fish drowning in air. When words finally came, they were rough, barely intelligible, as though his voice had forgotten how to form them properly. The sounds were harsh and broken, struggling through a throat that had not spoken in who knew how long. Not animal. He pressed a fist against his chest, over his heart, and she saw that his hand was shaking. Father. Then he turned away quickly, almost fleeing to his pile of furs, and did not look at her again that night. But Leonin watched him in the dying firelight, and she saw his shoulders shake in the darkness, saw him press his face into the furs to muffle sounds that might have been sobs or might have been something else entirely. And she understood that whatever humans were, they were not what she had been taught. They were not animals. They were not creatures without souls. They were something else, something her people had either forgotten or chosen not to see. Morning came with the sound of rain hammering the forest canopy far below, a rhythmic drumming that filled the cave with white noise. Leonine woke to find the fever broken, her body weak but no longer burning, and a piece of cooked meat beside her on a clean piece of bark. It was still warm, recently prepared, seasoned with herbs she did not recognize. Oscar sat by the cave mouth watching the rain, sharpening a stone blade against another stone with long, methodical strokes. The rhythmic scraping filled the cave like a heartbeat. He had washed, she realized. His face was cleaner, the blood gone, his hair pulled back with a strip of leather. The wounds on his shoulder had been treated with some kind of poultice that smelled of bitter herbs. He glanced at her, nodded once in acknowledgement, and returned to his work without speaking. Over the following days, something changed in Oscar that Leonin could not quite define but could clearly feel. He began to speak more, forcing words through a throat that seemed to have forgotten their shape, building sentences like someone relearning a skill they had once mastered. He told her, haltingly and with long pauses, that he had crashed on Losa 12 years ago. His shuttle had been part of a colony expedition, a group of families looking for a new world to call home, fleeing something he did not name on Earth. A navigation error had sent them into Losa's gravity well at the wrong angle, and the shuttle had torn apart during atmospheric entry. Most of the crew died in the crash, their bodies scattered across kilometers of forest. Those who survived the initial impact were taken by the forest or captured by the clans who found them. Oscar alone had escaped into the deep wilderness, into places where even the Karoo rarely ventured. Oscar paused, his hands clenching and unclenching as if trying to grasp something that kept slipping away. Daughter, Earth, her name, Emma. 7 years old. He touched his chest over his heart. Every day I see her face. Every day I live because I am father. Cannot give up. Cannot let her memory die. If I die here, alone, then it is like she never had father at all. He did not say what happened to Emma, whether she grew up on Earth, wondering why her father never came home from the colony ship, whether she even remembered him after all these years, whether she thought he was dead or had abandoned her. Leonine understood that some wounds were too deep for words, some pains too great to speak aloud without breaking something fundamental inside. Oscar decided something that day. Lenin saw it in the set of his jaw, the purposeful way he moved, the new focus in his eyes. He would not let this child die like so many others had died in this forest. He would teach her to survive in this brutal world. Teach her the ways that had kept him alive when everything said he should be dead a dozen times over. He would give her the tools to not just survive, but to thrive, to become something stronger than what the forest would try to make her. The lessons began immediately and without mercy. Oscar took her to a grove of flexible young trees that grew near a stream where the sunlight actually reached the ground. He examined several before selecting one, testing its flexibility, feeling the grain, nodding to himself. He cut it down with his axe, each stroke precise and economical, and began stripping away branches with his knife. "Bow," he said, then paused, forcing himself to explain properly in words that came slowly, but with increasing confidence. "Wood must bend, but not break. See here, the grain must follow it. If you cut against grain, bow shatters when you pull string. Shatter means it explodes, sends pieces into your face, blinds you, kills you instead of prey. Must respect the wood, must understand what it wants to do." He shaped the wood with his knife over the course of hours, pausing often to bend it, to feel its resistance, to close his eyes and seem to listen to something Leonine could not hear. She watched every movement with desperate attention, knowing that her life might depend on remembering these lessons. He carved notches at each end with incredible precision, then produced a length of twisted sinew from his pouch, already prepared and dried to exactly the right consistency. Bowstring from hind leg of jumper beast. The big ones, yes? Strong, flexible, but must be dry. Wet string snaps. Snaps means hits your face, maybe takes out eye. Everything in forest is trying to kill you, even your own weapons if you do not respect them. He strung the bow with practiced ease and handed it to Leonine. It was too large for her small hands, the pull weight far too heavy for her thin arms, but he shook his head firmly when she started to give it back. "You grow, bow grows with you, must struggle now. Struggle builds strength. Strength keeps you alive. Easy training makes weak warriors. Weak warriors feed the forest." He demonstrated the proper grip, adjusting her small fingers on the wood. "Feel the grain. Let it speak to you." Over the following weeks, Oscar taught her to make arrows with the same meticulous attention to detail. They gathered straight branches, and he showed her how to heat them over coals, rolling them constantly to straighten any curves, explaining that even a slight bend would make the arrow fly crooked and miss the target. Fletching came from the feathers of scavenger birds they caught in snares, and he taught her which feathers flew true and which would send arrows spinning wildly. For arrowheads, they chipped stones into sharp points, a process that took hours for each one, and Oscar demonstrated how to bind them with thin sinew and seal the binding with tree sap, testing each one by trying to twist it off. "Arrow that loses head and target is worse than no arrow," he explained. "You waste shot, you warn prey, you have nothing. Better to take time, do it right, have arrow that kills when you need it to kill." The first time Leonin tried to shoot, the string slapped her forearm with enough force to raise an immediate welt that made her cry out. Oscar did not comfort her. Instead, he showed her how to turn her elbow, how to anchor the string at the corner of her mouth, how to breathe out slowly as she released, letting the air carry the arrow forward. "Pain is teacher," he said, his voice neither kind nor cruel, just matter-of-fact. "Better to learn from small pain now than die from big mistake later. Body learns, body remembers. Next time you turn your arm without thinking. Pain teaches what words cannot." They hunted small game at first, spending hours in silent pursuit. Tree rodents that moved in nervous bursts from branch to branch, birds stupid enough to land near them, insects as large as Leonin's hand that could be roasted and eaten, and actually tasted almost pleasant when properly seasoned. Oscar taught her patience that went beyond anything she had known. They would sit motionless for hours, barely breathing, waiting for prey to emerge from hiding and forget that danger existed. Leonine's muscles would cramp until tears ran down her face. Her legs would go numb until she could not feel them at all. But Oscar never moved, and neither did she. His discipline became hers. When prey finally appeared, the kill had to be quick and clean. No suffering, no waste, no second chances. Oscar also taught her about poison, taking her to a marshy area where the blue-green frogs lived. They were no larger than Leonin's thumb, beautiful in their own way, their skin glistening with moisture and something else. Oscar showed her how to harvest the poison by carefully sweating the frogs over a heated stone, collecting the residue with a piece of bark, never touching it with bare skin. Small prey use poison arrow. Drops them fast, no chase, no energy wasted. Big prey use clean arrow. Poison makes meat bitter, makes it dangerous to eat. Poison is tool, like knife, like fire. Use it wrong, kills you. Use it right, keeps you alive. But archery was only one skill among many. Oscar insisted she learn to run, really run, in a way that the Keru with their explosive speed and quick exhaustion could not match. Keru people, he said, using the name the clans called themselves, they fast, strong, but they overheat. Watch. He pointed to a group of silver fangs in the distance, hunting a herd of herbivores through the trees. The predators sprinted with explosive speed that was terrifying to behold, closing the distance to their prey in seconds. But after 30 seconds, they slowed dramatically, sides heaving, panting with mouths open wide. They built for quick kill, sprint, strike, drag down, done. We built different. Humans built for different kind of hunt. He made Leonin run every morning when the air was cool. Not sprints, but long, steady distances through the forest that seemed to go on forever. At first, she could barely manage 10 minutes before collapsing in a heap, her lungs burning, her legs shaking. Oscar did not let her rest long, just enough to catch her breath before pushing her onward. Body adapts, he said. Humans sweat. We cool while running. No other creature on Lhasa does this. Even Keru overheat. This is our advantage, our weapon. We exhaust them. We outlast them. We run them into the ground and then we kill them when they cannot run anymore. He ran beside her every morning, his bare feet sure on the uneven ground, his breathing steady and controlled even as hers came in ragged gasps. He showed her how to breathe from her diaphragm instead of her chest, how to find a rhythm and hold it like a meditation, how to ignore the burning in her lungs and the screaming of her muscles by focusing on something else, anything else. Weeks passed, then months. Leonine could run for an hour without stopping, then 2 hours, then 3. Her body changed, becoming lean and hard, her legs developing muscles she had not known existed, her lungs expanding until she could take in air like a bellows. Oscar also taught her to climb, because in the giant forest of Lhasa, survival often meant going vertical when predators came. He showed her how to read bark, how to spot the subtle differences between solid wood and rot, how to test branches before trusting them with her weight, how to distribute her weight across multiple contact points. They climbed trees so tall that the ground disappeared in shadow far below them, so high that the air grew thin and cold. Leonin learned to sleep in branches, wedged into forks or tied with vine, to move through the canopy as easily as on the ground, to see the forest as a three-dimensional space instead of just ground and sky. As her body grew stronger over the passing months, Oscar taught her to fight in a way that acknowledged she would never be as large or strong as most opponents. He did not teach her elegant techniques or formalized styles like the clan warriors practiced in their training yards. He taught her to survive through any means necessary, honor be damned. Enemy bigger than you? Go low, cut legs. Knee is weak, ankle is weak. Big warriors forget to protect legs. Enemy faster? Use terrain. Make them slip, make them stumble, make them make mistakes. Enemy stronger? Use their strength against them. Let them commit, then move. Let their own force carry them past you into wall, into tree, into trap. He carved wooden practice knives and came at her without warning, attacking when she was eating, when she was sleeping, teaching her to react on instinct rather than thought. She learned to fall without breaking bones, rolling with impacts, distributing force across her body. She learned to use elbows and knees when weapons were too far, to bite and scratch and gouge her when nothing else would work. Oscar did not hold back much, and Leonine collected bruises like badges of honor, each one a lesson learned the hard way. Pain is teacher, he repeated often, his mantra and his truth. Body remembers pain longer than it remembers words. Next time enemy comes from that angle, body moves before mind thinks. That is how you survive. 6 months passed in this way, each day bringing new lessons and new challenges. Leonin was no longer the small, frightened child Oscar had cut from the tree of sorrow. She was still young, her body still developing, but she moved with a confidence that came from competence rather than arrogance. She could shoot a tree rodent at 20 paces, her arrows flying true more often than not. She could run for 3 hours without stopping, her breathing controlled, her pace steady. She could climb the tallest trees in the forest without fear, her hands and feet finding holes automatically. More importantly, she had learned to think like a survivor, to see danger before it arrived, to plan 3 moves ahead. They worked together now, a seamless unit that functioned almost without words. Oscar's experience and strength complemented Leonin's growing skills and sharper senses. The Keru had better eyesight than humans in the dim forest light, and Leonin could spot prey or danger long before Oscar's human eyes could make out the details. He provided the planning and the knowledge. She provided the eyes and increasingly the execution. Their greatest test came when they encountered a blue boar in the deep forest during a hunting expedition that had taken them far from the cave. The creature was massive, easily twice Oscar's weight, all muscle and fury compressed into a frame that seemed too dense to be real. Its tusks were like curved swords, yellowed with age and scored with marks from dozens of fights, and its hide was thick enough to turn aside most weapons, layered with fat and muscle and sheer toughness. It was feeding on roots when they found it, its powerful snout digging into the earth, unaware of their presence. Oscar signaled for silence with a hand gesture, and they both froze, becoming part of the forest. He studied the terrain for long minutes, his eyes moving constantly, and then pointed out features. A narrow ravine ahead, trees with low branches, the direction of the wind. He gestured his plan with his hands and Leonin nodded understanding. They spent 2 hours preparing, working without speaking. Using vines that Oscar had taught her to identify as the strongest, and sharpened stakes that they cut from young trees and hardened in a small fire, they built a trap at the ravine's narrowest point. The stakes were angled upward at precisely the right angle, designed to impale anything that fell onto them, their points treated with fire until they were as hard as stone. Oscar tested the trap multiple times, adjusting angles, adding more stakes, checking sight lines. Then Oscar and Leonin separated, circling the boar from opposite sides, moving through the undergrowth with the silence he had drilled into her. Oscar went first as planned. He stepped from cover suddenly, making noise deliberately, and threw a rock that cracked against the boar's flank with a sound like wood splitting. The beast whirled faster than something that size should have been able to move, squealing rage that echoed through the forest, and charged immediately without thought or hesitation. Oscar ran, not in panic but with calculated speed, leading the boar toward the ravine while staying just ahead of those terrible tusks. The creature was faster than he had expected, faster than anything that large had any right to be, and its tusks came within inches of his legs more than once. Leonine saw his face, saw that he was genuinely afraid, and that made her afraid in a way she had not been before. At the ravine's edge, Oscar leaped with every ounce of strength in his legs. For a moment he hung in the air, and Leonine's heart stopped because the gap was so wide, too wide, impossible. But he landed on the far side, rolled, and came up watching. The boar tried to stop, its 6 legs scrambling for purchase, but its momentum was too great and the ground was loose. It skidded forward, and Leonine's arrow took it in the eye, exactly as Oscar had taught her, at exactly the right moment. The pain and shock sent the beast stumbling forward out of control, and it fell onto the stakes with a scream that echoed through the forest and sent birds exploding from trees in all directions. They butchered the boar carefully over the next several hours, taking the meat they could carry, the hide for leather, the tusks for weapons, the organs for various uses Oscar had taught her. Everything was useful, nothing was wasted. Oscar smiled at Leonin as they worked, a rare expression that transformed his scarred face into something almost gentle. Good work. We are packed now. You and I. We hunt together. We survive together. We are stronger together than apart. Leonin smiled back, and for the first time since her father's death, she felt something other than fear and loss and anger. She felt pride, genuine pride and accomplishment. She felt like she belonged somewhere again. That night, as they roasted boar meat over their fire in the cave, the fat sizzling and dripping into the flames, Leonin asked the question that had been growing in her mind for weeks. Oscar, why did you save me? You could have let the Silver Fangs kill me. You could have taken the meat from them after and left me. Why did you risk your life for mine? He was quiet for a long time, so long that she thought he might not answer. Then he spoke, his voice soft but clear. I saved you because no child should die for adult mistakes. Your father showed mercy, and they punished you for it. That is not justice. That is cruelty. I saved you because I could not save my own daughter from being alone when I disappeared. I saved you because you reminded me that I am not animal. I am human. We protect the weak, even when it is hard, especially when it is hard. That is what makes us human and not beasts. They sat in comfortable silence after that, watching the fire dance and listening to the night sounds of the forest far below. They were family now, bound not by blood, but by something stronger. Survival, trust, love that grew from shared hardship and mutual dependence. 3 more months passed, and Leonin's skills continued to sharpen like a blade on a whetstone. She could track prey by the smallest signs: broken twigs, disturbed earth, displaced stones, changes in bird behavior. She knew which plants were edible and which would cause fever and death, which could treat wounds and which could paralyze. She had memorized the territories of the major predator packs through observation and painful experience, knew when and where they hunted, knew their patterns as well as her own. Oscar had created not just a survivor, but a hunter worthy of respect. Then one day, while ranging far from their cave in search of a particular herb Oscar needed for medicine, they found something that changed everything. A column of smoke rose in the distance, black and thick and wrong. Not the white smoke of cook fires or the clean smell of burning wood, but black smoke that spoke of destruction. Not a forest fire spreading uncontrolled, but controlled burning, deliberate and malicious. Oscar's expression darkened immediately, his whole body going tense. Karoo, war party, raiders. He started forward, then paused and looked at Leonin. We should go back. This is not our concern. We survive by avoiding others, by staying out of clan business. But Leonin had already seen the direction of the smoke. It came from the direction of her old village, the place she had been born, where her mother had lived before Karak's takeover, where children she had played with might still survive. Her home, or what had been her home. She looked at Oscar, and he read her face like a book. Dangerous, he said simply. I need to know what happened. I need to see. Oscar sighed, a sound that seemed to come from deep in his chest, but he nodded. We watch only, no engagement. No matter what you see, we do not engage. Understood? Understood. They approached carefully, using every trick Oscar had taught her about moving unseen. The smoke came from a small village of the Grass Runner clan, a peaceful group that survived by gathering plants and trading with other clans, rather than raiding or hunting. Leonin had visited once with her father years ago. Now their homes were burning, the structures they had built with care and time turning to ash and smoke. Leonin saw blue-skinned warriors moving through the destruction, carrying plunder, dragging captives, laughing as they worked. She recognized their markings immediately, felt her blood freeze. Silver Claw, her own clan. The clan her father had led with honor before Karak had taken everything. Leading them was a figure Leonin knew too well, a figure that haunted her nightmares. Carrack, the one who had killed her father and seized leadership through treachery disguised as honor. He was tall even for a Keru, his blue skin marked with scars he had earned in dozens of battles, each one a story of violence survived. He wore a vest of leather studded with metal taken from the crashed human ships, trophies of his power, and he carried a sword that had been forged in the old way, folded and hammered until it could cut through bone like water. His presence radiated authority and violence in equal measure. Leonin's hands tightened into fists, her nails digging into her palms until blue blood welled up. Oscar put a hand on her shoulder, but she shook it off violently. She wanted to run down there, to attack, to make Carrack pay for everything he had taken from her, her father, her home, her childhood, her innocence. "No," Oscar said quietly but firmly, his hand returning to her shoulder with more insistence. "Look at him. Look at his warriors. You see how they move? How they check corners? How they cover each other? These are not thugs playing at war. They are trained. They are veterans. You attack now, you die in seconds. And then I die trying to save you because I will not let you die alone. And Carrack wins everything. Is that what you want?" Leonine forced herself to breathe, to think past the red haze of rage that threatened to consume her. Oscar was right. She could see it now that she looked with tactical eyes instead of emotional ones. Carrack had 15 warriors with him, all veterans who moved with the confidence of men who had killed before and would kill again without hesitation. She and Oscar could not fight those odds. Not yet, not like this. "Then what do we do?" she asked, her voice shaking with suppressed fury. "We watch. We learn. Anger makes you weak, makes you make mistakes. Knowledge makes you dangerous. We learn how they fight, how they think, how they organize. Then we use that knowledge to destroy them." They spent the rest of the day observing the war party from concealment, barely moving, barely breathing. Oscar pointed out details Leonin would have missed in her anger. The way Carrack positioned sentries at the village perimeter, creating overlapping fields of view. The rotation of the guards changing every hour with fresh eyes. How the warriors moved in pairs, never isolating themselves, always within shouting distance of backup. It was professional, organized, efficient. Carrack was not just strong, he was smart. That made him far more dangerous. As evening fell and the 3 moons began to rise, the war party left the ruined village and began marching back towards Silverclaw territory. Oscar and Leonin followed at a safe distance, using the forest canopy to stay hidden, moving like ghosts from branch to branch. They tracked the party back to their encampment, a fortified position on a hilltop with clear sight lines and only one easy approach. Oscar studied it for a long time, memorizing every detail. That night, back in their cave with the fire burning low, Leonine could not sleep. She lay on her furs staring at the cave ceiling, seeing her father's face, seeing him falling with Carrack's sword in his chest, seeing the betrayal in his eyes. She saw her village burning, saw the grass runners being dragged away. She wanted revenge so badly it was like a physical pain in her chest, like something eating her from the inside. Oscar sat by the fire, cleaning his weapons in the methodical way he did every evening, the ritual that brought him peace. He glanced at her and seemed to make a decision. "Tell me about your father," he said softly. So she did. The words came pouring out like water from a broken dam. She told him how her father had been strong but fair, how he had insisted the Silverclaw clan trade rather than raid, how he had tried to change the old ways that led to endless cycles of violence. She told him about the human prisoner, a woman from Oscar's original expedition, who her father had tried to protect when others wanted to kill her, or worse. She told him how Carrack had called him weak for showing mercy to an animal without a soul, how Carrack had challenged him to single combat according to the old laws, and how Carrack had won through treachery. During the duel that should have been with swords alone, Carrack had used a hidden knife to create an opening, then delivered the killing blow with his sword, and claimed it had been honorable victory. And she told him how no one had spoken against it, because everyone feared Carrack, and mercy had become weakness. Oscar listened to everything without interrupting, his face expressionless, but his eyes showing that he heard every word, felt every emotion. When she finished, her voice hoarse from speaking, he was quiet for a long moment before responding. Your father sounds like a good man. Good men often die young in cruel worlds because they refuse to become cruel themselves. But their ideas live longer than they do. Your father showed mercy. That mercy led to you being saved by a human. Perhaps his mercy was not weakness. Perhaps it was the beginning of change, a seed planted that will grow after he is gone. I want to kill Karak. I want to make him pay for everything. I know, but wanting and doing are different. If you want revenge, we must be smart. We must prepare. We must think 3 moves ahead. Rush in angry, you die. Plan carefully, you win. Over the following weeks, Oscar became a ghost in truth, a nightmare that haunted Karak's warriors. He did not attack them directly in ways they could understand or counter. Instead, he waged a different kind of war, a psychological one that ate at their confidence and morale. He started by raiding the patrols in small ways. Small groups of 2 or 3 warriors would venture into the forest to hunt or scout. They would return to find their weapons missing, their supplies scattered, their water skins drained. Sometimes they would wake in the night to find footprints around their camp, human footprints that were impossibly close, circling them like a predator stalking prey. Oscar made sure they knew he had been there, that he could have killed them while they slept but chose not to. The message was clear. You are not safe. You are not in control. You are prey. The warriors began to talk, their voices carrying fear that spread like sickness. They whispered about a ghost in the forest, a demon that walked like a man. Some claimed it was the spirit of Leonin's father, returned for vengeance from beyond death. Others said it was the human monster that had survived in the deep wild for so many years, grown feral and powerful. Fear spread through the camp like a disease, undermining confidence and discipline. Oscar escalated gradually. He ambushed a supply convoy, not killing the guards, but tranquilizing them with poison arrows and taking everything of value: food, weapons, medicine. He left a message written in charcoal on a tree where they would find it when they woke. The forest watches, the forest remembers. Karak's response was predictable and exactly what Oscar wanted. He sent larger patrols, better armed and more alert, spending more energy and resources on security. Oscar adapted immediately. He began setting traps that were crueler in their efficiency. Pits covered with leaves and branches that dropped warriors into spike-filled holes. Trip lines attached to falling logs that crushed anyone who triggered them. Nets that pulled victims into the air, leaving them hanging helpless like caught fish, exposed and vulnerable. The psychological impact was devastating to watch unfold. Karak's warriors no longer wanted to patrol, no longer wanted to enter the forest. They knew something was hunting them, something that understood their tactics better than they did, something that anticipated their movements and turned their own procedures against them. Morale collapsed like a rotten tree. Warriors began deserting, disappearing in the night, preferring to become outcasts rather than face the ghost. Leonine watched Oscar work with fascination mixed with unease. She had never seen warfare like this. The crew fought with honor, in open combat where strength and skill determined victory fairly. Oscar fought without honor, using fear and unpredictability as his weapons, making war on the mind rather than the body. It was effective in a way that disturbed her deeply, because it meant the teachings of her childhood had been lies or at least incomplete truths. "Why do you not just kill them?" she asked one night as they watched a patrol from hiding, saw the warriors jumping at shadows, weapons drawn against threats that did not exist. "Dead men are martyrs," Oscar replied, his voice thoughtful. "Other warriors see dead friends. They get angry. They fight harder. They unite against common enemy. Frightened men spread fear, undermine confidence, make others question. I want Karak's army weak in spirit before we ever raise a blade against them. When we finally face him, I want his warriors to remember that a human outsmarted them, outlasted them, and made them look like fools. I want them to doubt their leader, doubt themselves, doubt everything. Then they will not fight well. Then we can win." Leonine understood the strategy intellectually, but something about it felt wrong emotionally, like a violation of natural laws she had been raised to believe. "My father believed in honor," she said quietly. "Yes, and honor got him killed. Oscar said, not unkindly but with brutal honesty. You want to fight with honor? Honor is luxury of the strong, of those who can afford to lose and survive. We are not strong in numbers or resources. We are clever. We use what we have. If that bothers you, then when you finally face Carrick, you can fight him with honor. But first, I make sure you live long enough to have that chance. Months passed in this way, each week bringing new psychological attacks that wore down Carrick's forces. By now, the story of the forest ghost had spread beyond Carrick's clan to every clan for 100 kilometers. Other Keru spoke of it in hushed tones around fires at night. Some claimed the ghost could walk through walls, could disappear into smoke, could control the minds of animals. Others said it was tall as a tree, strong as 10 warriors, immortal and unstoppable. The truth was simpler and somehow more frightening. A single human, armed with nothing but primitive weapons and a deep understanding of his enemy's psychology, had made an entire army afraid of shadows. During this time, Leonin continued to train relentlessly. She was 9 years old now, no longer a child by any measure. Her body had grown lean and strong from constant exercise and good food. Her marksmanship was exceptional, better than most adult warriors. She could put an arrow through a target the size of a fist at 40 paces, even in dim light, even in wind. More importantly, she had learned to think tactically, to analyze situations and plan responses. Oscar would present scenarios to her, and she would plan responses considering multiple options and consequences. What if surrounded by 5 warriors? What if injured and unable to run? What if outnumbered 10 to 1? She learned to think 3 moves ahead, to see patterns and opportunities, to turn disadvantages into advantages. One day, while exploring the deep forest in search of a reported Keru patrol, they found something that would change the balance of power. A crash site different from where Oscar's shuttle had crashed. The twisted remains of another human shuttle lay half buried in earth and vegetation, covered in vines and moss that had grown over it for years. Most of the metal had corroded away, eaten by time and weather, but some pieces remained intact, protected by alloys that resisted decay. Oscar examined them carefully, running his hands over panels and support struts with something like reverence. "This is from my ship," he said quietly, his voice thick with emotion. "The Hope. We thought we would build a new world here, a colony where our children would grow up free. Instead, most of us fed the forest within days. Our dreams died in fire and blood." They salvaged what they could over several trips, carrying the metal back to the cave. Oscar selected pieces that had survived the years intact, and over the following weeks he built a forge. It was primitive by civilized standards, just a pit lined with stones and fed by charcoal, but using a bellows made from animal hide and long practice, he could achieve temperatures high enough to work metal properly. He forged 2 short swords for Leonine, teaching her the basics of metallurgy as he worked. How to heat the metal until it glowed the right color, how to hammer it while hot, folding and refolding to create layers of strength. The final blades were crude by civilized standards, showing hammer marks and imperfections, but they were sharp and would hold an edge better than stone. They balanced perfectly in her hands, an extension of her arms. For himself, Oscar created something different. A war hammer, its head carved from the densest stone he could find, with a metal spike salvaged from the shuttle driven through the center and bound with bands of worked iron. The whole thing weighed as much as a small child. He tested the hammer against a fallen tree, and the impact shattered wood like it was glass, sending splinters flying in all directions. "Good," he said with satisfaction. "Now we are ready for what comes next." But ready for what exactly, they were not entirely sure. Taking the fight directly to Carrick still seemed impossible. He had fortified his position further, building proper walls now, and even with Oscar's psychological warfare reducing morale, charging the stronghold would be suicide. They needed something else, some way to get inside, some advantage they had not yet exploited. The answer came from an unexpected source, as answers often do. They were hunting in the northern forest when they found tracks that did not make sense. Not animal tracks, but Keru, and these were different from the usual patrol patterns. The patterns suggested someone running without care or caution, fleeing rather than hunting. Oscar followed the trail with concern growing on his face, and they found a warrior collapsed beside a stream, his body half in the water. He was young, barely older than Leonin, and he had been badly wounded. A deep gash across his stomach oozed blue blood that had attracted insects. Leonin started to approach, but Oscar held her back with a firm hand. Could be trap, could be bait. We watch. They watched from cover for an hour, barely moving, every sense alert. The warrior did not move except to breathe, each breath shallow and painful. No backup arrived, no patrol came searching. Finally, Oscar approached carefully, his hammer ready, every muscle tense. The warrior's eyes flickered open, and Oscar saw fear there, but not of him. Fear of something worse than death. Please, the warrior gasped in the Keru language, his voice barely audible. Kill me. Please, don't let me go back there. Back where? Oscar asked, kneeling but keeping his weapon ready. Karak's citadel. He's gone mad with paranoia. He's executing anyone who speaks against him, anyone he thinks might be disloyal. My brother questioned an order in front of others, and Karak had him thrown from the walls. Made an example. Made us all watch. I ran. I couldn't watch anymore. I couldn't serve anymore. Please, just kill me quickly. Oscar and Leonin exchanged glances. This was the opportunity they had been waiting for. The crack in Karak's armor they could exploit. Oscar knelt beside the warrior, setting his hammer aside to show he meant no immediate harm. I can save you, but you must tell me everything. Layout of the citadel, guard positions, patrol schedules, Karak's routines, everything you know. The warrior's name was Torin, and over the next several hours, as Leonin treated his wound with moss and herbal compresses Oscar had taught her to make, he described Karak's fortress in detail. It had been built in the ruins of an ancient Keru structure, expanded and reinforced with new walls and towers. High walls built from massive stones, a single main gate with multiple layers of security, and towers at the corners where archers stood watch day and night. Inside were barracks that housed the warriors, supply buildings, training yards, and at the center, a great hall where Karak held court and made his pronouncements. How many warriors? Oscar asked, committing every detail to memory. 40, maybe 50 now. Hard to say because some have deserted, but Karak keeps recruiting more from other clans, offering them plunder and glory. But half of them are like me. They follow Karak from fear, not loyalty. If someone stood against him, someone with legitimacy who represented the old ways, they might turn. They might remember what the clan used to be. Oscar looked at Leonin with speculation in his eyes. Legitimacy, like the daughter of the previous chief, the one everyone thinks is dead? Leonin felt her heart begin to race. They think I'm dead. They left me for the Silver Fangs. Then you coming back from death will mean something. It will be a sign from the forest, from the old gods. It will be proof that your father was right and Karak is wrong. They let Torin rest for 3 days in a secure location away from the cave, building his strength. His wound began to heal under Leonin's care. Oscar fed him, gave him water, and slowly earned his trust through actions rather than words. On the 3rd night, Oscar laid out his plan in detail. We cannot take the citadel by force. We do not have numbers or resources, but we can get inside through deception. Once inside, Leonin will challenge Karak to single combat according to the old laws that he claims to follow. She has that right as the previous chief's daughter, a right that cannot be denied without dishonor. Karak will never accept, Torin said immediately. He'll just have his warriors kill you both on the spot. He doesn't care about honor anymore. Maybe, but if we do this publicly, if we shame him in front of all his warriors, his pride will force him to accept. The Keru value honor above all else, even if Karak has forgotten. If he refuses a legitimate challenge in front of everyone, he loses respect. His authority crumbles. His warriors will see him for what he is. That is worse than death for a leader. And if he accepts, he'll kill her. I've seen Karak fight. He's the best fighter I've ever seen in my life. No one has beaten him in single combat. He's too strong, too fast, too experienced. Oscar smiled grimly. Then we make sure she lives long enough to land one good hit. That's all we need. One good hit in the right place. And I teach her exactly where that place is. The plan was insane on every level. It required everything to go perfectly. But it was also their only real chance. The only path that might actually work. They prepared for 2 weeks with an intensity that pushed Leonine to her limits. Oscar drilled her on fighting technique constantly, morning to night, barely allowing her to rest. He played the role of Kerak, using his size and strength to mimic a larger opponent, studying Torin's descriptions of Kerak's style and incorporating them. He taught her how to use an opponent's aggression against them, how to make them overcommit and leave openings, how to turn strength into liability. Most importantly, he taught her to control her breathing under stress. "Fear makes you hold your breath," he said, grabbing her throat to simulate being choked, holding it until she struggled. "You hold your breath, you tire faster. You tire faster, you die. No matter what happens, keep breathing. Deep breaths. Control the breath, control the body, control the body, control the fight." As the day of their assault approached, Oscar seemed to grow quieter and more withdrawn. Leonin found him one evening, sitting at the cave mouth staring at the 3 moons, his expression distant and troubled. "What are you thinking?" she asked, sitting beside him. "I am thinking that I am about to help a 9-year-old girl fight a grown warrior to the death. I am thinking that if you die, it will be my failure, my fault, my burden to carry. I am thinking that if you live, you will become a leader, and leaders carry burdens I know too well. I am thinking I should have found another way. Do you regret teaching me? No, never. I regret that the universe requires children to fight adult battles. I regret that mercy is punished and cruelty rewarded. I regret that good people die young, while bad people grow old. But I do not regret you. You have given me purpose again. You made me remember what I am, what I was supposed to be. What are you? A father. That is all I ever wanted to be. A good father. I failed Emma by being taken away. I will not fail you by not preparing you for what you must face." They set out the next morning before dawn. Torin guided them through the forest toward Kerak's citadel, taking paths he knew from his years of service. The journey would take 3 days of careful travel. They moved cautiously, avoiding patrols, camping without fires, eating cold food. On the second night, they had to cross a high mountain pass that tested all of them. The pass was brutal beyond anything Leonin had experienced. The air was thin, each breath burning in her lungs like fire, her chest heaving to pull in enough oxygen. The altitude affected Karoo more severely than humans due to differences in lung capacity, and Leonin began to feel dizzy after only an hour of climbing. Her vision blurred at the edges. Her balance became uncertain. Her hands grew clumsy. She stumbled over rocks she should have easily avoided, and Oscar caught her before she could fall down the steep slope. "I can't," she gasped, her chest heaving. "Cannot breathe. Cannot think." "You can." Oscar hoisted her onto his back without hesitation, securing her arms around his neck, carrying her weight as well as his own and all their gear. Humans evolved for endurance. We can carry our young for miles when necessary. We can run prey to exhaustion across entire continents. We can climb mountains that would kill others. This is what we are. We endure when others cannot. We survive when survival seems impossible. His words became a rhythm in Leonin's head as they climbed higher, and the air grew thinner still. We endure. We endure. We endure. Oscar's legs shook with fatigue, each step requiring conscious effort. His lungs burned with every breath. His heart hammered against his ribs like it wanted to escape. Sweat poured down his face despite the cold, but he did not stop. He did not slow. He carried her to the summit where the wind howled like a living thing, and then down the far side where the air gradually thickened enough for her to walk again. When he finally set her down on solid ground, Leonin saw that his legs were shaking so badly he could barely stand. His face was pale, his breathing ragged, but he was smiling, that fierce smile that said he had won another battle against the universe. "See? We endure. Humans endure. That is our power." On the third day, they reached the citadel as the sun was setting. It stood on a hilltop that had been cleared of all trees, giving clear sight lines in every direction. The walls were built from massive stones, fitted together without mortar, reaching 3 times the height of a man. Towers rose at each corner, platforms where sentries stood with bows and javelins. Banners marked with the silver claw symbol hung from the battlements, torn and weathered, but still proud. From their hiding place in the tree line, they could see guards patrolling the walls in pairs, alert and professional. Frontal assault is suicide, Oscar said, studying the fortifications with a critical eye. We need another way in, something they have not defended properly because they think it is too small to matter. Torrin pointed to the western wall where shadows gathered. There's a drainage system. It carries rainwater out of the citadel when the storms come. The grate is metal, but it's old. Probably as old as the original structure. The metal might be corroded enough to break. It is our only chance. They waited for full darkness, when the 3 moons were obscured by clouds and the world was painted in blacks and grays. Under the cover of darkness absolute, they moved to the western wall, crawling the last 100 meters on their bellies. The drainage tunnel was exactly where Torrin said, a dark opening, barely large enough for a person to squeeze through, covered by a metal grate that had indeed corroded over the years. Oscar worked at it with his knife, prying at weak points, and eventually the grate swung aside with a squeal that seemed impossibly loud in the quiet night. They squeezed through the tunnel one by one. It was tight, dark, and smelled of mold and worse things. They crawled on hands and knees through standing water that soaked them to the bone, every splash echoing in the confined space loud enough to wake the dead. Leonin fought down panic as the walls seemed to close in around her. If they encountered guards now, trapped in this tunnel with no room to fight or flee, they would be killed like rats in a barrel. The tunnel rose sharply at the end, and they emerged into a courtyard near the base of the citadel. Oscar pulled Leonin and Torrin into the shadow of a building immediately, pressing them against the wall, listening with every sense alert. Footsteps approached, the measured tread of sentries making their rounds. Oscar held up a hand in the darkness. Wait, be still, be silent. The sentries passed within 3 meters of their hiding place, so close that Leonin could hear them talking quietly about the evening meal. They did not look in the shadows. When their footsteps faded into the distance, Oscar led the group deeper into the citadel. Torrin navigated by memory, taking them through alleys between buildings, through shadows that seemed deeper than natural. They moved like ghosts, freezing when patrols approached, pressing into darkened doorways, barely breathing, hearts hammering. Oscar's training had made Leonin's movements silent, and she was grateful for every painful hour spent learning to walk without sound, to breathe without noise, to become invisible. They reached the great hall's exterior wall. According to Torrin, Carrick would be inside now, holding evening court, making pronouncements and hearing disputes. Oscar pressed his ear against the stone, listening intently. Muffled voices carried through the walls, many voices raised in argument or agreement. Good. An audience for what was about to happen. This is it, Oscar said quietly, his voice barely a whisper. Once we go through those doors, there's no turning back, no escape, no second chances. Leonin, you absolutely sure about this? She nodded, her heart racing but her hands steady. I am sure. This is what my father would have wanted. Justice, not revenge. Change, not just vengeance. Oscar checked his weapons one final time, hefted his warhammer, took a deep breath, and pushed open the great hall's doors with both hands. The hall fell silent, as if a spell had been cast. 40 warriors turned to stare at the intrusion, hands moving to weapons. At the far end, sitting on a raised stone seat that might once have been a throne, was Carrick. He had aged in the 4 years since Leonin had last seen him, his face more scarred and harder, his posture still radiating dominance and barely contained violence. When he saw who had entered, his eyes widened in genuine shock. The little ghost returns from death, he said slowly, recovering his composure. I assumed the silver fangs had eaten you years ago. I see they choked on you and spit you back out. Leonin walked forward, and the warriors parted before her like water before a stone. She felt their eyes on her, felt the weight of their judgment and their surprise. At her side, Oscar moved with predatory confidence, his war hammer resting on his shoulder, his eyes scanning the room for threats. Behind them, Torrin closed the doors, sealing their fate. Leonin reached the center of the hall and stopped. She reached into her pack and pulled out the skull of the Silver Fang Alpha, the one Oscar had killed 4 years ago. The skull was bleached white now, cleaned and preserved. She threw it at Karak's feet where it clattered on the stone. I returned to claim what is mine by blood and right. My father was chief before you murdered him with treachery. You used a hidden knife in what should have been honorable combat. By the old laws, I challenge you for leadership of the Silverclaw clan. Karak stood slowly, unfolding his body like a serpent preparing to strike. He was even larger than she remembered, easily 2 meters tall, his muscles like coiled cables under his blue skin. He descended from his seat and walked to the silver fang skull, prodding it with his boot. "You bring a pet human to fight for you?" Karak said, his voice dripping with contempt. "You think this animal can protect you? Humans are weak. Humans are slaves. Humans are meat that can talk. This one is probably feral, barely smarter than the beasts it lives with." Oscar stepped forward, his movements controlled and deliberate. Something about the way he moved made several warriors step back instinctively, their hands tightening on weapons. "I am no pet," Oscar said in clear, precise Kuru that shocked everyone. "I am the ghost that has haunted your patrols for months. I am the reason your warriors fear the forest. I am the reason half your forces have deserted. I am the one who has made you look weak in front of your clan, made you doubt every shadow." Karak's face darkened with rage. You! You are the forest ghost, the human who dares to challenge Keru warriors." "Yes, and I am human, nothing more. Your warriors claim humans are animals without souls, but it is a human who has outthought them, outlasted them, and made them afraid to enter the forest. What does that say about you and your leadership? What does that say about Keru superiority?" The hall erupted in angry shouts. Warriors surged forward, but Karak raised a hand, and they stopped immediately. He was staring at Oscar with something that might have been respect or might have been hatred so pure it transcended emotion. "You speak well for an animal, but words are not strength. This is the circle of blood, the old test. If you want to reach me, you must first survive my warriors. Prove you are worthy of even standing in this hall." He gestured to 5 of his largest fighters, men who had won dozens of fights. "If this human can stand after facing my best, then perhaps he has earned the right to watch his little ghost die." "No," Leonin said firmly. "The challenge is mine by right. He fights only to earn me the right to face you, according to the old laws you claim to follow." Karak smiled coldly, showing teeth. "Agreed. But he fights alone. No weapons but what he carries. No help. My warriors come 3 at a time until he falls, or my warriors are exhausted. If he falls, you die with him. If he stands, you get your challenge." Oscar looked at Leonin. She saw the calculation in his eyes, saw him weighing odds that seemed impossible. Then he handed her his warhammer and all his knives except one, keeping only a small fighting blade and a battered wooden shield he had made from layered bark and hide. "I accept your terms." The warriors formed a circle in the center of the hall, a space marked by ancient bloodstains that had soaked into the stone over generations. Oscar stepped into it alone. 3 of Karak's best moved to face him. They were armed with swords, spears, and axes. They wore leather armor reinforced with metal plates. Oscar wore only his hide clothing and carried a knife and shield. The disparity was obvious to everyone watching. Karak raised his hand dramatically. "Begin." The 3 warriors attacked in perfect coordination that spoke of years training together. One with a spear thrust high at Oscar's face, another with a sword slashed low at his legs. The third circled wide with an axe looking for an opening. Oscar moved with surprising speed for someone his age, using his shield to deflect the spear while ducking under the sword. The axe clanged against the stone floor where he had been standing a heartbeat before, sending up sparks. Oscar's strategy became clear immediately. He was not trying to kill these warriors quickly or impressively. He was trying to survive as long as possible. He used his shield not as a weapon, but as a tool, redirecting attacks rather than blocking them outright, letting force slide past him rather than absorbing impact. He moved constantly, never staying in one place, forcing the warriors to chase him around the circle, expending their energy while conserving his own. 1 minute passed. 2 minutes. The warriors began to breathe harder, their movements becoming slightly less precise. They were used to quick, decisive fights where strength and speed determined victory in seconds. This grinding, evasive style frustrated them. The spearmen overextended on a thrust, trying to pin Oscar against the circle's edge, and Oscar pivoted smoothly, letting the spear slide past his body. He grabbed the shaft, yanked hard, and the warrior stumbled forward into his companion's sword swing. The blade cut a shallow line across the spearman's shoulder, and he staggered back cursing. 3 minutes. The warriors were angry now, attacking with less coordination and more aggression, letting emotion override training. This was exactly what Oscar wanted. He caught an axe swing on his shield, and the impact shattered the layered wood, but he had already rolled away when the pieces fell. He popped up without the shield, now armed only with his knife, but somehow looking more dangerous for it. The sword wielder saw what he thought was an opening and charged with a roar. Oscar did not retreat or try to dodge. He stepped inside the swing, too close for the blade to cut effectively, and drove his knee into the warrior's groin with all his strength. As the warrior doubled over in agony, Oscar locked his arm around the warrior's neck in a chokehold and used him as a human shield against the others, dragging the struggling body around the circle. 4 minutes. Oscar's breathing was labored, sweat running down his face, but he was still moving with purpose. The warriors were exhausted, having never fought anyone who simply refused to die or give up. Oscar released his hostage with a shove and faced the remaining 2 attackers. They circled him warily now, their earlier confidence completely gone. The axe warrior swung in a powerful overhead arc meant to split Oscar's skull. Oscar waited until the last possible moment and stepped aside. The axe buried itself deep in the stone floor with a crack, and before the warrior could pull it free, Oscar kicked him in the knee from the side. The joint hyperextended with a wet cracking sound that made everyone watching wince, and the warrior screamed and fell. The final warrior, the spearman with the wounded shoulder, backed away slowly. He was afraid now, and everyone could see it. Oscar advanced slowly, his knife held low, his eyes locked on his target. The spearman thrust desperately, and Oscar caught the spear shaft with his bare hand. The point drew blood from his palm, but he held on anyway. With his other hand, he punched the warrior 3 times in rapid succession, nose, jaw, temple. The spearman collapsed unconscious. 5 minutes had passed. Oscar stood in the center of the circle, blood running from his wounded hand, breathing hard but still standing upright. The hall was completely silent, shock written on every face. Carrick stared for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Finally he said, 3 more warriors, fresh ones. 3 fresh warriors entered the circle immediately. These were older, more experienced veterans who had seen dozens of fights. They did not charge recklessly. They moved carefully, spreading out to surround Oscar, taking their time. He turned slowly, trying to keep them all in view, but there were too many angles to cover. They attacked simultaneously from 3 sides with practiced coordination. Oscar managed to dodge 2 strikes, his body moving on pure instinct, but the third, a heavy club, caught him in the ribs with a sickening thud. The impact sent him stumbling, gasping for air. He recovered just in time to avoid a sword that would have taken his head, the blade passing so close it cut hair. His movements were slower now, each breath visible pain, his ribs either broken or badly bruised. 1 minute, 2 minutes. Oscar was taking damage he could not avoid, his body accumulating injuries. A sword cut his shoulder, opening a wound that bled freely. A spear grazed his thigh, leaving a burning line. But he was still standing, still moving, still dangerous in ways that made no sense. He caught one warrior's wrist mid-strike and twisted with all his remaining strength until bones snapped audibly. The warrior dropped his weapon screaming, and Oscar caught it, now armed with a proper sword instead of just a knife. The dynamic changed instantly. Oscar went on the offensive, his attacks wild but effective, fueled by desperation and pain. He was not trying for clean kills or impressive technique. He was trying to inflict maximum damage in minimum time before his body gave out completely. He slashed a warrior's leg, the cut deep enough to sever tendons. He stabbed another in the arm, the point finding the gap in armor. He headbutted a third and broke his nose in an explosion of blue blood. The warriors fell back, and Oscar stood in the center of the circle, swaying but somehow still upright. 6 more minutes. 9 minutes total of continuous combat. Oscar had survived 9 minutes against 6 trained warriors in succession. His body was a map of wounds, blood running from a dozen cuts, but he had not fallen. He had proven something that no one in the hall could deny. Carrick stood and walked to the edge of the circle slowly. He looked at Oscar, really looked at him for the first time, and something changed in his eyes. "Enough," Carrick said, his voice carrying authority. "You have proven yourself beyond question. No Keru alive could have done what you just did. You are no animal. You are no pet. You are—" He paused, searching for words that seemed to escape him. "You are something new, something I do not understand and cannot categorize. Rest now. You have earned the right to watch your ghost girl challenge me. I will kill her with honor, as her father should have been killed." Oscar tried to respond, tried to speak, but his legs gave out suddenly. He collapsed to one knee, then both knees, then fell forward onto his hands. Blood pooled beneath him, dark against the pale stone. Leonin rushed forward, but Carrick's warriors blocked her path with crossed spears. Oscar looked at Leonin through the barrier of warriors. His face was pale from blood loss, his breathing shallow and rapid. But he smiled, a bloody, terrible smile that showed red teeth. "Your turn now," he rasped, his voice barely audible. "Remember everything. Remember to breathe. Control the breath. Control the fight. You can do this. I believe in you." Carrick turned to Leonin, his expression serious. "Now, you and I, single combat as you demanded. No tricks, no help, just skill and strength and will. You die as your father died, but at least you die with honor." Leonin drew her two short swords. They felt perfect in her hands, balanced and sharp, extensions of her will. She stepped into the circle, and Carrick followed, drawing his own blade, the same sword he had used to kill her father 4 years ago. "By the old laws that you claim to follow," Leonin said, her voice clear and strong, carrying to every corner of the hall, "I challenge you for leadership of the Silver Claw clan. The gods will judge which of us is worthy. May they have mercy on the loser." Carrick nodded with something that might have been respect. "Begin!" He attacked immediately, not giving her time to prepare mentally. A powerful overhead strike designed to end the fight in seconds through overwhelming force. Leonin did not try to block, knowing her strength could never match his. She rolled aside and the blade rang against stone where she had been standing, sending up sparks. She came up slashing, both swords aimed at Carrick's legs in a coordinated strike. He jumped back with surprising agility for his size, and her blades cut only air. They circled each other slowly. Carrick was much larger and stronger, his reach longer, his experience vastly greater. But Leonin had spent 4 years training with someone who understood intimately how to fight larger opponents. She did not try to match his strength. She focused on speed, positioning, and patience. Carrick thrust suddenly. Leonin parried with one sword, deflecting the attack, and cut with the other. Her blade opened a shallow wound on his forearm. First blood. The warriors watching murmured in surprise. Carrick's eyes narrowed. He attacked again, this time with more caution and respect. His strikes were measured, probing for weaknesses, testing her reactions. Leonin gave ground, letting him advance, watching his footwork carefully. He favored his right leg slightly when he retreated. An old injury, perhaps, or just a habit. Either way, it was a weakness she could exploit. She feinted high, and when he raised his sword to block, she dropped suddenly and swept his right leg. He staggered but did not fall, his balance impressive. His counterstrike was fast, almost too fast, and Leonin barely avoided it. The blade cut through a lock of her white hair, and she felt the wind of its passing. They fought for 3 minutes without pause, neither gaining clear advantage. Leonin was faster and more agile, but Carrick was more experienced and much stronger. Every time she created an opening, he covered it before she could exploit it. Every time she tried a combination of strikes, he anticipated and countered. He was good, better than she had expected or hoped. This would not be easy. Leonin felt her breath coming faster, felt the strain in her muscles. She forced herself to slow her breathing consciously. Breathe. Control the breath. Control the body. She found her rhythm again, her movements becoming more fluid and natural. She stopped thinking and let her training guide her, trusting in the countless hours of practice. Carrick grew frustrated. He was used to winning through overwhelming force, to breaking opponents through sheer power. This darting, evasive style confused him, made him uncertain. He overcommitted on a swing, putting too much power into it, and Leonin ducked under it cleanly. As he stumbled past her, off balance, she slashed the back of his knee, not deep enough to cripple, but enough to hurt, enough to slow him. Carrick roared in pain and fury and spun, his sword whistling through air in a horizontal arc. Leonin blocked with crossed swords, and the impact sent shockwaves up her arms that made her wrists scream in agony. Her bones felt like they might shatter, but she held on, gritting her teeth. Carrick pressed his attack, raining blow after blow, trying to break through her defense through persistence. Leonin gave ground steadily, blocking and dodging, looking for any opening, any mistake she could exploit. There. His guard dropped for just a fraction of a second as he raised his sword for another overhead strike. Leonin thrust with both swords simultaneously. One blade found his shoulder, driving deep into muscle. Carrick grunted and pulled back sharply, leaving the sword embedded in his flesh. He yanked it out with his free hand and threw it aside, blue blood running freely down his arm. Blood ran down his arm, soaking his vest. He was breathing hard now, his earlier confidence shaken. Leonin still had one sword, and she held it ready in both hands. They stared at each other across the circle, both wounded, both exhausted, neither willing to surrender. "You fight well," Carrick said, genuine respect in his voice now. "Your father would be proud to see you now. You have become a true warrior, but pride does not win battles. Skill does not always triumph over experience." He charged suddenly, not with his sword, but with his whole body, turning himself into a living weapon. Leonin tried to dodge, but he was too fast, too close. He caught her in a tackle, and they crashed to the floor hard enough to drive the air from her lungs. His weight pinned her completely. His hand found her throat and squeezed with crushing force. Leonin's vision began to darken at the edges, stars exploding behind her eyes. She still held her remaining sword, but she could not get leverage to thrust properly. Carrick was too heavy, his position too dominant, his grip too tight. She was going to die here, so close to victory, but ultimately defeated by superior strength and size. Then she remembered Oscar's words, spoken during hundreds of training sessions. Use their strength against them. Turn disadvantage into advantage. There is always a way if you can see it. Instead of fighting the pressure on her throat, wasting precious energy, she relaxed. Let her body go completely limp, as if losing consciousness. Carrick felt the change and squeezed harder, convinced she was dying, wanting to finish it. Leonin's free hand found his wounded shoulder and dug her fingers deep into the injury, tearing at damaged flesh. Carrick screamed, a sound of pure agony, and his grip loosened for just 1 second. It was enough. Leonin brought her knee up between them with all the strength she had left, planted her foot on Carrick's chest, and kicked with everything. He flew backward, crashing into warriors who caught him. Leonin rolled to her feet, gasping for air that burned her bruised throat. Her vision swam, each breath painful, but she could stand. Carrick recovered quickly and raised his sword. He was favoring his wounded side now, his movements noticeably slower. They came together again, blade against blade, neither giving quarter. The fight dragged into its 10th minute. Both were exhausted, both bleeding, both refusing to fall or surrender. The hall watched in absolute silence, witnessing something they would speak of for years. Carrick swung high, a powerful strike meant to split her skull. Leonin ducked low, going under his guard and thrust upward with perfect precision. Her sword found his stomach, sliding between ribs, the point finding something vital, not deep enough to kill immediately, but deep enough to end the fight. Carrick's eyes widened in genuine shock, his mouth opening. He dropped his sword, the clatter impossibly loud in the silent hall. Leonin pulled her blade free and stepped back, her own body swaying with exhaustion. Carrick fell to his knees, his hands pressed against the wound. Blue blood seeped between his fingers, running down his legs to pool on the ancient stones. He looked at her, and for the first time since she had known him, she saw not hatred or contempt in his eyes, but respect, genuine and complete. "How?" he whispered, his voice weak. "You were just a child 4 years ago. How did you become this?" "A human taught me," Leonin said, her voice rough from being choked. He taught me that strength alone is not enough to survive. Will matters more. Intelligence matters more. Endurance matters more. Adaptability matters most of all. My father knew this truth. That's why you killed him. He threatened the old ways, the simple ways. But his ideas survived in me. They will outlive both of us. She could kill Karak now with one thrust. End him, end the threat, end everything he represented. The warriors waited, silent, watching. Justice demanded blood. Revenge demanded death. But something else demanded more. Leonine raised her sword. Then she lowered it deliberately. I will not kill you as you killed my father. Not with treachery disguised as honor. If you wish to die, you may take your own life with your own blade. If you wish to live, you will leave the Silver Claw lands and never return. You will become wanderer, outcast, nothing. The choice is yours, but you will never lead again. She turned her back on him, the ultimate display of contempt, and walked to where Oscar lay. Torin had dragged him to the side of the circle and was trying frantically to stop the bleeding from his many wounds. Leonin knelt beside the human, taking his rough hand in hers. You won, Oscar said, his voice barely audible. I knew you would. I always knew. Behind them, something extraordinary happened. The warriors began to kneel, one by one. They bent knee to Leonin, acknowledging her victory and her right to lead. Even those who had followed Karak loyally could not deny what they had seen. She had defeated their leader in fair combat. She had shown honor and victory when killing would have been easier. She was worthy of leading the Silver Claw clan. Karak watched this from where he knelt, his lifeblood slowly draining away. Then slowly, with visible effort, he stood. He retrieved his sword from where it had fallen. For a moment, Leonin thought he might attack her from behind, might try to take her with him. But instead, he walked to the doors of the great hall. His footsteps echoed in the absolute silence, each one seeming to take forever, growing fainter and fainter as he passed through the doors and out into the night. They never saw him again. Leonin was now chief of the Silver Claw clan, the youngest in the clan's long history. The days that followed were chaotic beyond anything Leonine had imagined. She needed to establish her authority over warriors who had followed Karak for years. She needed to heal Oscar's wounds, which were severe enough that the healers feared for his life. She needed to navigate the complex politics of leading a clan she had not been part of for 4 years, learning about alliances and feuds she knew nothing about. Torin became her most trusted advisor, helping her understand the current situation, guiding her through the maze of clan politics. Oscar recovered slowly under the care of Keru healers, who were skilled beyond anything humans had achieved on Earth. They treated his wounds with poultices made from forest plants, stitched his cuts with thread that dissolved naturally, set his broken ribs with splints that hardened like stone. But the damage had been severe, and even 2 weeks later, Oscar moved with constant pain. Every breath hurt. Every movement reminded him of the price he had paid. Leonine visited him every evening without fail, bringing him food prepared specially, news of the clan's activities, small gifts from warriors who wanted to honor the human who had made their victory possible. They would sit together, sometimes talking, sometimes in comfortable silence, rebuilding the bond that combat had strained. On one such evening, Oscar told her something that broke her heart. It is time for me to leave, he said quietly. Leonine felt her heart sink, felt tears threatening despite her new position of strength. Why? You are safe here. The clan respects you now. They call you the ghost made flesh. You could stay, be my advisor, be my friend, be my father still. I am those things already, and I will always be those things, Oscar said gently. But I do not belong here, Leonin. I am not Keru. I am human. My place is in the wild, where I have lived for so long. That is where I am comfortable, where I understand the rules. Here I am like a wolf in a house. I would always be uncomfortable, always out of place. You saved my life. You taught me everything. How can I lead without you? Oscar smiled, and it transformed his scarred face. You led yourself to victory. I only showed you how to use what you already had inside. You are strong, clever, brave, and honorable. You will be a better leader than Carrick ever was, better than even your father might have been. You do not need me anymore. You never really needed me. You just needed to learn that you could survive on your own. I will always need you. You are my father in every way that matters." Oscar's eyes grew wet, tears cutting lines down his weathered face. "And you are my daughter, not by blood but by choice, and that is stronger than blood ever could be. You gave me purpose when I had forgotten what it meant to be human. You made me more than just a survivor hiding in the forest. You made me a person again, a father again. For that gift, I can never thank you enough." They sat together in silence for a long time, watching the three moons rise through the window. Finally, Leonin spoke again. "When will you go?" "Tomorrow, at dawn, before it becomes harder to leave." The next morning, the entire clan gathered at the gates of the citadel without being summoned. Word had spread that the human was leaving, and they came to honor him. Oscar stood there, his few possessions bundled in a leather pack. His warhammer was slung across his back, a weapon that had become legendary. He looked almost healthy, though Leonin could see the stiffness in his movements that would probably never fully heal. Leonin approached him, and the clan stepped back respectfully, giving them space for their farewell. She reached up and touched his scarred face with one hand, her touch gentle. "Thank you," she said, her voice thick with emotion she could not hide. "For everything, for saving me, for teaching me, for showing me that humans have souls deeper than any ocean." "Thank you," Oscar replied, his own voice unsteady, "for reminding me what I am, for giving me reason to be human instead of just surviving." He turned to leave, but Leonin caught his arm. "Will I see you again? Ever?" "Perhaps. The forest is large, but not so large that paths cannot cross if the forest wills it. If you ever need me, truly need me, light 3 fires in a triangle on the high plateau where we crossed. I will see them from the forest and come, but I hope you never need to light them. I hope you become so strong, so wise that you never need my help again. I will remember." Oscar walked toward the forest, his stride steady despite his injuries. He did not look back, and Leonin understood why. Looking back would only make leaving harder. She watched until he disappeared into the trees, becoming one with the shadows, the ghost returning to his domain. The clan began to disperse, returning to their duties, but Leonin stood at the gates for a long time, staring at the place where the human had vanished. She thought about everything that had happened. About being tied to the tree of sorrow, about learning to hunt and fight and survive, about the long journey from that terrified child to this moment. She thought about her father's mercy and how it had been called weakness. She thought about Carrick's question that had never been properly answered. She thought about that first night in the cave, when she had asked Oscar why he was crying for her, and he had said he was not an animal, he was a father. She understood now, understood in a way she never could have as a child. Oscar had cried for her because crying was human. Emotions were human. Compassion was human. Love was human. And humans, despite what the Keru had been taught for generations, were not animals without souls. They were creatures of profound depth, capable of surviving impossible odds through intelligence and will. They were adaptable, clever, enduring, and above all, capable of choosing to care, even when caring was dangerous or disadvantageous. Leonin made a decision in that moment, one that would change the Silverclaw clan forever. She would change her people's views on humans systematically and completely. She would teach them that humans were not animals to be enslaved or dismissed. They were potential allies, potential friends, potential teachers. They were worthy of respect and protection. They had souls as deep as any Keru, perhaps deeper because they chose compassion despite their physical weakness. It would take time, generations perhaps. Old beliefs died hard, rooted deep in tradition and fear. But change had to start somewhere, and it would start with her leadership. Years passed like water flowing over stones, wearing away old shapes and creating new ones. Leonin grew into her role as chief. Under her leadership, the Silverclaw clan prospered in ways it never had before. They traded more and raided less, building relationships with other clans based on mutual benefit rather than fear. They made alliances with neighboring groups, even former enemies. They developed new technologies and techniques, some of which Leonin had learned from Oscar and adapted for Keru use. The clan grew strong, and other clans began to follow their example. Seeing that peace could be as profitable as war, occasionally hunters would return with stories of the forest ghost. They spoke of finding perfectly arranged campsites deep in the wilderness, of traps that caught game without hurting it, of a figure seen briefly in the distance before disappearing like smoke. These stories made Leonin smile each time she heard them. Oscar was still out there, still surviving, still living on his own terms, still human in the deepest sense. Leonin never saw him again, though she looked for signs during her travels through clan territories. She kept her promise, though. 3 torches arranged in a triangle sat ready in her chambers, prepared to be carried to the high plateau and lit if ever she needed him. She never did light them. Her pride would not allow it. Oscar had taught her to stand on her own, to be strong through her own will, and she would honor that lesson until her last breath. But sometimes, late at night when sleep eluded her, when the 3 moons were high and the forest whispered with wind and unseen life, Leonin would stand at the window of her chambers and stare toward the deep wilderness where Oscar lived, and she would remember a scarred human with light blue eyes who had shown her that souls were not defined by species or strength, but by choices. The choice to protect the weak, the choice to show mercy, the choice to love even when love brought only pain. And she would whisper into the darkness, knowing he could not possibly hear, but needing to say the words anyway, needing to speak the truth her heart held. Thank you, Father, for teaching me that we are more than what others say we are. We are what we choose to be, and I choose to be worthy of the sacrifice you made. I choose to honor your memory through my actions. I choose to be human in my soul, even though I am Keru in my body. In the deep forest, in a cave high on a cliff face that few could reach and fewer could find, Oscar sat by a small fire. He was older now, his hair more gray than black, his body carrying new scars alongside the old ones. Another year survived. Another season endured. He had survived another day, another month, another year. He would survive tomorrow too, and the day after that, for as long as his aging body allowed. He thought about Leonin sometimes, perhaps more than sometimes. He imagined her grown into full adulthood, strong and wise, leading her people with courage and intelligence. He hoped she was happy. He hoped she remembered the lessons. He hoped she understood that the most important thing he had taught her was not how to fight or hunt or survive the dangers of the forest. It was how to choose to be human when the world told you that you could be less. How to choose compassion when cruelty was easier. How to choose honor when dishonor was more profitable. How to choose to care when caring made you vulnerable. Oscar stared into the fire, watching flames dance in patterns that meant nothing and everything. He had survived the crash that killed most of his expedition. He had survived the forest that had taken so many others. He had survived the isolation that might have driven him mad. He had survived by becoming something less than civilized, something more than animal. But in teaching Leonin, in choosing to save her rather than let the forest take another victim, he had rediscovered something he thought he had lost forever in the 12 years of lonely survival. His humanity, his soul, his purpose beyond mere survival. And that, more than any survival skill, more than any weapon or technique or trick, was what would outlive him. His humanity lived on in Leonin, in her choices, in the changes she would bring to her world. His compassion echoed through her leadership. His lessons shaped her wisdom. He was not just a survivor hiding from death anymore. He was something better, something worthy of remembering. He was a father, and that was enough. The fire crackled, sending sparks spiraling upward into the darkness. The forest sang its nightly chorus of predators and prey, of life and death, of the eternal struggle that defined existence on this harsh world. Oscar closed his eyes, finally at peace. In the morning, he would check his traps. He would hunt for food. He would maintain his weapons and repair his shelter. He would continue the endless cycle of survival that would only end when his body finally gave out. But tonight, for this moment, he rested. And in his rest, he dreamed. He dreamed of a small blue-skinned girl with white hair who had been left to die, who had asked him a question that changed everything. They said that humans are animals without souls, Then why are you crying for me? Because I choose to be human, Oscar thought in his dream, his lips forming a smile. Because I choose to care. Because I choose to love, even when it hurts, especially when it hurts. That is what souls do. They feel, they care, they love. And that is what makes us human, regardless of what body we wear. That was the answer. That was always the answer. And it was enough to justify a lifetime of struggle and pain. It was enough to make survival meaningful rather than just mechanical. It was enough.